it's Radio Free 501c, the voice of Rogue Tulips Consulting. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode. Don't forget to subscribe. We're on all your favorite podcast services. This week, I welcome my guest, Carol Hamilton of Grace Social Sector, and we're going to be discussing Mission Critical, Creating Impact. Welcome to episode 189. Hey everybody, it's Monday, March 27th, and that means it's time for another episode of Radio Free 501c, the voice of Rogue Tulips Consulting. I'm your host, Cecilia Sapp. I'm the principal and founder of Rogue Tulips, and thank you so much for joining us this week. To our global audience, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be. I'm really excited to close out our month of March celebration of women podcasters in the association community with a longtime colleague of mine, Carol Hamilton. Her podcast is called Mission Impact, and her company is Grace Social Sector, where they focus on nonprofit specific strategic planning. Carol, welcome to the show. Would you like to say hello to the audience and tell us something about yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be here and great to be with your listeners. My name's Carol Hamilton, Grace Social Sector Consulting. And as you mentioned, I also have a podcast, Mission Impact. And I've been in the sector for quite a while, longer than I probably want to age myself, but really enjoy helping organizations figure out what's the most important thing for them to focus on, put their energy towards over the next couple of years, and how can they really have all of their internal and external stakeholders aligned to those key strategic initiatives. So I really enjoy doing that. I know a lot of people kind of roll their eyes when they hear the word strategic planning, but for me, it's a lot of fun.
You know, I'm with you. I love strategic planning. And I've actually, this is a note for our audience. I actually had the opportunity years ago to be in a facilitation that Carol led for a networking group we were both in at the time. And it was really great. And we all got a lot out of it. And one of the things, Carol, that I noticed when I was prepping for this episode, and I was looking at your website, and you said you grew up in a lot of different places around the world. So you got to see a lot of different cultures. How does that inform your work as a strategist?
That's such an interesting question. Yeah, I think there's the adage, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so I come to working with organizations and working with them on their strategy and helping them create their roadmap, always with the mindset of how does your organizational culture actually support that? And I think growing up outside of your own culture, so I had the privilege of growing up in different places in Europe, tagging along as the kid with the parents who were doing the overseas thing, expat thing. And I think growing up outside of your own culture gives you a perspective that one culture exists, that when you're in a culture and you never experience anything else, I think it's easy to think this is the only and one way we do things, but being aware that there is a multitude of ways that people approach the most fundamental things of, do you keep your blinds open or closed? Just all sorts of ways in which the assumptions, the norms of a culture, that different groups all have their own, and they're all different, and that there are those assumptions. And so one of the things that I try to help organizations do is kind of uncover some of those assumptions so that they can take a look at whether they are still relevant and appropriate for today's context.
That's a really great point you just made, and an excellent segue into our topic for today, which is Mission Critical, Creating Impact. You mentioned that about culture and testing assumptions. And I think one of the things that any organization forgets or overlooks is that our own cultures evolve internally. So I think that past experience you've had as an expat is excellent insight into helping nonprofits stay mission focused. So one of the things that we all see, we're both consultants, we work with nonprofits, of course, one of the things we both see is mission drift. So that's where the organization gets distracted by the new shiny thing. You and I were talking before the episode about artificial intelligence seems to be all anybody can think or talk about right now. Not that that's a new shiny object, because it's actually part of how we're doing things now, but people get distracted on the small things like that instead of the larger ideas and the big picture, as we like to call it. So, what are some of your approaches to helping people either avoid mission drift or come back from mission drift?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot, there's the shiny objects, but I think there's also a lot of pressures, especially for organizations that are having to, tap into philanthropy for their revenue, to kind of follow trends. And so I think part of doing a process like strategic planning kind of helps bring everyone back to the mission, and take a look at, where are we in terms of that? What's our current state? Is everything we're doing really contributing to the mission that we want to move forward? Another thing that I'll work with groups on is helping them map out what their impact is. So thinking about all the different things they're doing, and then thinking, again, we were talking about assumptions. What are the assumptions that if we do X, activity or program or offer this service, we assume this thing will happen, and mapping that out and kind of testing those realities. And so any of those processes, I think, help people kind of realign and refocus in on the mission, and gives them an opportunity to have a conversation about whether there's some things that they need to let go of and say no to.
Oh, yes. I love that. Purposeful abandonment is a great.
So hard.
So hard. So do you help people with that? I mean, obviously you do, because you were just saying that. So do you find a lot of pushback when you're encouraging that?
For whatever reason, I feel like it's the hardest thing that nonprofits struggle with, that it's so easy to add on, do new things, whether it's the shiny object of the new trend that we need to be following, or some influential board member has a great new idea of some great new initiative that they should do. So there are many ways in which it's easy to, and I think the other thing is that folks in the nonprofit sector are very ambitious. They're compassionate. They want to say yes. And so that actually saying no to something, either coming at you or something that you've been doing for a long time that may have a dedicated constituency that's really interested in it still, but has been shrinking,
Right.
to gently help them say, we either need to let go of this, or we needed to give it to someone else, or we need to, think about doing it differently. So, but it's really hard to do, I think.
Yeah. Oh, it totally is, because I think a lot of the influence, as you said, like you have influential people, but I think there's also a much stronger emotional influence within nonprofit organizations than you might find in a for-profit organization. And I'm not saying that people in the for-profit world are not passionate or committed or really emotionally tied to what they do, but it's a different level, I think. And I think sometimes that's why it can be kind of hard to work with a board, because they're so committed and they've put so much in, and it's hard to get people to think clearly, I think, sometimes. But
and I think another big difference between the for-profit and the nonprofit sector is just the approach to leadership. I mean, if we both are business owners, so we get to make the decisions in our organization. But I've never worked in a nonprofit where one person was the only person who got to make the decision. It's always a group that you're having to engage and bring along. And it's much more of that distributed leadership. And so, not always, there's lots of different ways that leadership is set up, but generally there's going to be much more of a group that's having to make a decision, which can make it really, challenging and difficult to kind of wind your way through all the emotions that you talked about.
I think that boards being a requirement for all nonprofits is a blessing and a curse
Exactly.
in a lot of ways for what you just said, because it's got to be group decision. And I think you either end up with group think or you end up with a lot of dissonance. That's a kinder word, I think, than like combat or confrontation. But you were talking earlier about trying to get people to let go of things. Are you also a fan of the concept of the sacred zombie cow?
Say more about that. I want to know about sacred zombie cows.
And you know what? I just love
Sounds
that.
like a video game that I need to be playing.
Maybe ASAE can develop it. It could be a
There you
revenue
go.
source. Play the sacred zombie cow game. But I believe, and I need to go back and check this because I cannot find it anywhere. I believe David Gamble wrote a book called The Sacred Zombie Cow. And it was all about what you were talking about earlier, letting go of those programs that are no longer working. Maybe they're not needed anymore, but somebody loves this program. They're emotionally tied to this program. And so he likened them to the sacred zombie cow. The program is basically dead, but it's a sacred cow and you can't get rid of it. And I cannot find that book anywhere. I can't find an article he wrote, but I did hear him give a presentation years ago at an ASAE conference on this topic, and I just loved it. But I guess I should have bought his book sooner if there was one. So now I'm like really curious. I got to reach out to him and say, hey, did you actually write this book or am I crazy? I might have dreamt it. I don't know.
Well, if you did, it's a great catchy title for sure. And I mean, and I think there's, sometimes the thing just has to go. But sometimes you can morph a program. An example that I've worked with is an organization that was looking at, what used to be a really successful fundraising event for them over time had, the amount of investment in terms of staff time and board and time stayed the same, but the number of people who came dwindled over time. And they took a look at it and they realized that it was, the core group of people who still participated were folks who, were essentially like alumni of the board. They'd been involved with the organization for a long, long time. And so the function of bringing them together was still relevant, but it didn't need to be as flashy or resource intensive as it had been in the past, because it was actually costing them money instead of raising any money. Mm-hmm. So they shifted it to just, okay, we're going to get together once a year and have a potluck. So it still served that emotional need of those folks and kept them connected to the organization, but without the resource, suck that it was before. And so sometimes it's like, it's got to go. And sometimes, it can change. Sometimes there's another organization that it might be, oftentimes if there are two organizations that are, maybe in the same regional area that are doing something similar, another organization may be better poised to take that over. So handing off a program. So there are lots of different options, but yeah, if it's a zombie cow, probably time to go.
See, now you're going to be thinking about that all weekend.
I am.
Or all week, I should say.
For sure.
So it's, so we're pursuing this line of discussion about keeping the organization focused on its mission and mission critical. The mission is critical. So do you have any tips for organizations to stay on mission to help them keep that focus?
Well, I think there's a tool that when I'm working with clients and helping them do a strategic plan, I also want to have them make, when we finish the project, that they have this tool as well. And it's something called a strategy screen. And so it really is to do it, to handle those situations that we've been talking about, those zombie sacred cows or the shiny object that's coming at you, and coming to agreement around a set of criteria. And the number one is always, is this in alignment with our mission? But oftentimes there are other ones. Do we have the staff capacity? Are there resources to support this? Is this fundable? How is this going to help our reputation or hinder it? How is it going to connect us to our community and our constituency? And then some, specific ones that have to do with organizations. And again, this isn't something that I made up. La Piana Consulting created the strategy screen, but I really think it's a useful tool, and it helps kind of get out of that the very influential or persuasive board member or staff member who, no matter what they present, it gets a yes, just because they're so eloquent and can convince everyone. It gives you a level playing field to have, okay, we're always going to use these 10 set of criteria to make our decisions. So I find that as a really helpful tool to help people be in the same conversation too, and be comparing things in a similar way.
Well, as the world is continuing to shift, we're obviously going through a period of human history where things are changing quickly and shifting a lot. What do you see as a better way to ask this question? What do you see as the future of nonprofits in contributing to the world around us?
Wow, that's a big question. I think over the last couple of years, the whole issue of isolation and people not feeling connected to community has certainly come to the fore. And I think, whatever the mission of an organization is and how it wants to contribute to creating a better and more thriving world, it's bringing people together, and it's creating communities. And I think that is a huge contribution that the sector makes, in addition to all of the work that the whole sector is doing in pursuit of all of those missions. It's bringing groups of people together, like-minded, maybe in a similar profession in the association world, where they get that sense of connection and belonging. So I think it's it's not something that's going away as much as I feel like there's a lot of gloom and doom about associations in the association space, but that basic human need to connect is not going away.
And I have always thought that is the role of the nonprofit in our world. A lot of people in other countries who are forming new nonprofits, maybe they're adding nonprofit to their culture. It really kind of started here in a lot of ways. I was doing some research the other day, and you'll probably find this interesting too. The first nonprofit started in the late 18th century in the United States. What was actually not even the United States yet. It was like 1735. And it was a group to help people who were former slaves to get their life going again. And so we were already at that point helping each other through an organized fashion. And the first modern nonprofit was the Peabody Education Fund, which was founded in 1903. So we've been doing this always. We've always been helping each other, whether it's through a local church or just coming together for a barn raising or something. And so it's always been the relationship industry, I think. That's my opinion about it. And I think in a world that's increasingly trying to pull us apart, we have a much more crucial role now to bring us back together and show us what we do have in common and how we can work together and have that respect for each other. So I totally agree with you on that. I think we are always going to be here. But I'm glad you brought up the kind of negativity, because we seem to be kind of a negative profession sometimes. I've really been noticing that the last year or so. It's not that I'm hearing anything new, but I'm really just noticing it more now. And I
think, why do organizations, you talked about the first nonprofit in the US, and it was addressing a problem, right? So it's people seeing a need, seeing a problem, and addressing it. And depending on the sector or the type of organization, they may be dealing with people in trauma, like vicarious trauma, all of those things. And so it can be, they're often tackling the really hard things.
Yeah.
And so that might temper folks' perspectives.
I hope so. I've always been very positive about our profession, what we do. And and even, I know like the C3 is going to tend to be more, their mission is going to be more focused on actually doing service to others, feeding people, educating people, helping people find homes, whatever it is that they need, like a really, almost like you said, a trauma. But I think all nonprofits, whether they're associations or charities or foundations, we're all trying to help people accomplish something or be better or learn something new. And I think as long as we keep focused on that, we're going to be good. And that's always going to be our mission of our profession, I believe. I think that that's our mission critical overall in our profession.
Yeah, and I think if you thinking about that negativity and those zombie sacred cows, I mean, I think in the association space specifically, because the world is changing so fast and because professions are changing, new jobs are emerging, and some jobs are going away, the organization that then represents that group of companies or profession, is not going to be as relevant. And so I think organizations being more willing to consider joining forces, whether it's a strategic initiative or finally a merger of organizations, rather than having so many different organizations, serving a splintering of a field, can be really helpful as well to keep that positive momentum.
That's a great point. That's a great topic to round out our conversation for this week. So is that something that you help nonprofits decide? Should we merge? Do you?
It's not something that has come up in the work that I've done, but I do think that one book that I was reading and one person I had on my podcast, Don Tebby, he's a specialist in those leadership transitions, and he advocates that, especially at the point of a leadership transition where there is going to be a point where there isn't an executive director for a little bit, or there'll be an interim or whatnot, that an organization should always actually ask the question, do we still need to exist?
Wow.
And because it's actually the easiest time to, if they would be better served by merging into another organization, it's the easiest time to do it because there's no issue of who's going to then lead the new organization. So I think it's something that organizations, when they're thinking about their missions, some missions are perpetual and some missions aren't. And, which are you? So being mindful of that, I think, is important.
Wow, that is an excellent point. I love that. So, well, Carol, it's been great having you on to talk about mission.
Thank you.
I hope to have you back in the future if you're interested. Would love to continue that because that is what drives us, right?
Absolutely.
So at the end of every episode, I like to ask my guests, what's the one thought you would like the audience to take away today? And if they want to follow up with you directly, what's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah, I think the one thought I'd like to have people take away is that even though we are in this, what's been called a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, chaotic and emergent or ambiguous, the strategic planning is still relevant. It's not about nailing down everything you're going to do over the next 3 years, but it's setting your intentions and not just being reactive to those shiny objects. So where do you want to go? And what's your North Star? And if folks want to get in touch, gracesocialsector.com is where you can find me. Check out Mission Impact on the same place that you listen to this podcast, and love to hear from folks.
Oh, great. Well, thank you, Carol. Thank you so much. And Carol's also a first-time guest. We've had a lot of first-time guests already first quarter this year. So, and we'll definitely have Carol back to talk about this. So I would like to thank Carol again, Carol Hamilton, Principal, Grace Social Sector. Check out her podcast through her website, gracesocialsector.com. So on behalf of Carol and myself, I want to thank you for joining us this week. If you'd like to learn more about Rogue Tulips Consulting and how we can help your organization bloom outside the box, check out our website, roguetulips.com. if you are a current CAE, a CAE candidate, or just a curious sort like myself, and you're looking for some education about nonprofit management, check out our education program, the 501c League. It has its own website, the 501cleague.net. You can learn all about our courses, our study groups, and you can even download our digital course catalog. So I encourage you to check it out. So that's all for this week, everyone. Carol and I are going to go rogue for now, but we'll be back next time with another exciting episode. Don't forget to subscribe. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.